Stanford University.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Connie Wolf. I'm the director of the Cantor Arts Center. We're on the other side of campus, and I hope everyone here makes it over there at least once or twice or 3 times before January 5th. Until January 5th, we are so honored and delighted to have the exhibition of the retrospective of Carrie Mae Weems. We present many lectures and programs throughout the year, exhibitions, and I just want to do a few little housekeeping things before we get started. On October 22nd, we're very happy that we'll be having a lecture by Deborah Butterfield that will be at the Annenberg Auditorium at the Cummings Art Building at 6 o'clock, and again, free. And before I forget, please turn off your cell phones. Just a quick reminder. So tonight we gather for a really special evening. It is the Wilsey Distinguished Lecture. It is supported by our very dear friends and loyal supporters, Bobby and Mike Wilsey. And we are so grateful that each year they provide us with support to bring in somebody really fabulous in the field of the arts to meet with us, talk with us, and share their ideas. And so tonight we're very honored to have the distinguished Carrie Mae Weems. We all know she just won the MacArthur Fellowship. So well deserved, so important, and the only visual artist this year to win. It's, you know, we need to buoy this up a little bit. So we welcome Carrie along with her really wonderful husband, Jeff Hoon, who's here tonight as well. The exhibition that brings Carrie here was organized by the Frist Center for the Arts in Nashville, Tennessee. And then after it is here, closing in January, it will then go to the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. I want to thank the entire team at the Cantor Arts Center and everybody associated with the Cantor for making this all possible. From our very loyal members who do so much to support the museum, to our students who connect to our programs, and I want to do just a special shout out to the students from IDA, the Institute for Diversity in the Arts, and to Italic, which is the new residential program in the arts, and to the students working with faculty member Alita Hayes on a special performance in conjunction with the exhibition. And also want to welcome all the other students here with us tonight. And at the Cantor, everyone participated in this event and the exhibition, but I especially want to thank Elizabeth Mitchell, the Bert and Dee Dee McMurtry Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs, for her leadership on the team. Many of you know that Stanford has a very impressive and long history with art and artists. Even before the founding of the university, the Stanford family collected art, they understood the value of art, they understood the importance of visual culture, the power of art to communicate, to create meaningful discussions. And when they founded the university, they realized that Jane insisted we have to create a museum at the same time. And in terms of images, the medium of photography and film, which is very much what Carrie's work is about, Stanford holds one of the most important places in its history. It was here on the farm, if we can imagine that it was once a farm, that Leland Stanford first commissioned Edward Muybridge to answer the question, what happens when a horse gallops? And here on the farm, he created a whole set of what was then technology to understand the process of people moving, animals moving. And that really also led to the founding of film. So with our history on this farm, now at a university, it is such a fitting moment to honor and to host this retrospective exhibition of Carrie Mae Weems. She's an artist, she's a video maker, she's a writer, she's a speaker, but most importantly, Carrie is a compelling, thoughtful, insightful storyteller. She reaches back into history as a way to understand where we are today. She looks at life, and especially her own life, as a way to make a sense of place. And she creates her art as a way to inspire us to make change, to see things differently, and to make a difference. Her art challenges us to question how we look at images. Her art questions how ideas have been transmitted. She is a true interdisciplinary thinker, working with language, history, science, philosophy. Carrie is no stranger to the Bay Area. She was born in Portland, Oregon, and in her late teens found her way to San Francisco to pursue a career in modern dance, studying with the amazing Anna Halprin's postmodern dance workshop. She became politically active in the labor movement, and during the late 1970s, she began to pursue her interest in photography, first as a means of political and personal documentation, and then increasingly as a form of intellectual and aesthetic and expression. She earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts at the Cal Arts and a Master of Fine Arts at UC San Diego. She's an ongoing student. She never stops learning. She never stops asking questions. She never stops challenging us to think differently. So it is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage the one and only Carrie Mae Weems.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, my darling. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Connie, I think that the Cantor couldn't be luckier to have Connie Wolf here. It's just amazing. An extraordinary woman doing important things. And people in New York still are lamenting that she's not there working with them at the Whitney and other institutions that she's been associated with. So you all are very, very lucky. I'm feeling very much at home, and here I see old friends who have really shaped my life, Gabrielle and Daryl. I see friends that have helped me with my work over the years, people that I've loved and have held dear and close to my heart. So I'm really thankful and grateful that you're here, that you've taken the time to spend some part of your evening with me. Of course, I want to thank my wonderful husband who makes all things possible. You know, he even makes me purr. So I think maybe let's bring the house lights down so that we can just get started, okay? Bring them down, please. And then there's this thing that's really shining right in my eyes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. So, of course, I always really start my work with my family, because my family has been so important to me. I've always known that for the most part, and I've learned even more as I have matured as a woman, that I do absolutely nothing alone. That everything I do is really aided in one way or another by a whole host of other people that are in one way or another standing behind me, standing beside me, people that have widened the path for my possibility. I am aware of that. I am thankful for that. I am grateful for that. You know, I'm always thinking about the way in which artists are functioning, how they're working, and paying attention to what other artists are doing endlessly fascinates me. It keeps me up at night and it gets me up in the morning, laying that sort of foundation for the possible. So I would get up very, very early in the morning and think a lot about what was possible because other artists were already making it. People like Roy T. Carava, you know, like Gary Simmons, Barbara Kruger, who did such important work. Still, that piece, Our Body is Our Battleground, is an amazing piece of work. That idea that artists are always dealing with notions of the body, of the skin, what the skin will allow you to do or not do, I think is an amazing thing. And over the course of my time, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. I always think of the work that I'm making in relationship to the work that's being made around me, that it doesn't stand or situate itself in isolation, but always, hopefully, in dialogue with the other art that is being made in my moment, my time, and of course, before my time. The way artists, of course, use themselves to mark in that sort of beautiful way that early Man Ray used himself, or Duchamp used himself to mark. His identity, I think, is an extraordinary thing. The sort of, I call it the first slow fade. People like Gomez Pina, Coco Fusco, who decided that they would also use their bodies in a particular way in order to examine the way in which the black body, the minority body, the brown body was thought of. So they put themselves in caves for a long period of time at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. And people would come by and look and gawk. They weren't sure if they should release them or not. Dieter Alpert, who used himself over and over and over in a very intense way in terms of marking the skin, marking the body. James Luna, who lays himself, Native American, to mark his, the journey not only of himself, but the journey of his people. Or somebody like Eleanor Anton, beautiful Eleanor Anton, who did such profound work and continues to do amazing work, in this case, posing as Antonova, the black ballerina. Or somebody like Adrian Piper, who used herself to brush up against the world in a very profound way. Sometimes she would paint herself in black paint and walk down the street and rub herself up against strangers and passers-by, right? You know, which is also a tradition in other parts of the world, actually in South America, where that happens as well. You know, the brilliant Ana Mendieta, who I miss terribly, died tragically. And later I started thinking about her and made some very specific work around her exploration of, again, the way in which she used this body and used this skin. Or Felix Gonzalez Torres, who I miss terribly, who did this really profound, elegant, really beautiful mapping of his own body as it's going through and disintegrating because of the AIDS virus. One of the most elegant, one of the most powerful works that I know of, where the audience has to pass through this thing, these curtains, right, that represent the changing in red and white blood cells. I mean, just absolutely beautiful work that the audience is engaged in moving through this idea of skin. Fabulous piece. So, you know, so these ideas that, you know, I'm working with artists that inspire me. And sometimes, of course, you know, for you students out there, sometimes, you know, they don't inspire me. I really dislike the work. And I'm trying to understand why, you know? And, but even when I dislike the work, I always respect the artist and I always respect the integrity that comes with the making, because I know that no matter what, if you are seriously searching for the truth through the work, that there's a level of integrity that must be respected, even when I have great difficulty with the work. I have great difficulty with my own work. Then I do this other kind of work as well. I mean, you know, on the one hand, I'm deeply involved in the practice of making work, of being an artist, a conceptual artist, making photographs, making videos. But I'm also, and I have been for a long time, very interested in the social, and that has been very important to the way in which I approach making. And a certain period of time, a few years ago, I started thinking about doing my own kind of organization, a kind of collective that would bring together various artists working in social, in that intersection between art and civic dialogue. And so I put together a group, it's called Social Studies 101. And through Social Studies, I do a whole group of, a whole range of activities. One was to work with the artist and director, museum director, former museum director, David Ross. And I put together a class on art and civic dialogue for Syracuse University. And out of that came sort of wonderful, wonderful kinds of work. And paying attention to those kinds of artists like the Astor Gates and Rick Lowe, Paul Chan, sort of amazing artists that are doing very important work in relationship to community, I think is absolutely important. Peter Sellers was one of our guest artists that year, along with a number of other people as well. Bill Viola, I believe, also showed with us. Didn't he, Jeff? Did he show with us, or was it primarily through your organization and Lightwork? But he was a very good friend of Bill's, so it was sort of a wonderful synergy, anyway, of that sort of coming together. And the project, the Urban Video Project that Bill became a part of, came out of a group of students who've been working in my class, thinking about how do you bring art out of the museum and into the street. They started projecting, for instance, on snowbanks and that sort of thing. So really wonderful, wonderful. It was a powerful class. And in the middle of this class, and doing this work, one morning, it was a snowy morning, very snowy morning in Syracuse, New York. And I thought that I was going to spend the day in bed. I had this like wonderful idea, right? That I would, that I would have my books, a newspaper, a big cup of coffee, my bathrobe, maybe I might even watch I Love Lucy. I'm just prepared for a day of rest, and I stumble into the kitchen, and I grab the coffee and the newspaper, and I put on my robe, and I go back to bed, and I open up the newspaper, and there was a horrible incident where a child had been killed in my neighborhood. A baby caught in gangland violence. And so I immediately got up and I went downstairs to the studio to start thinking about how one might respond, what would be the response to this this crisis. And so I immediately started, by the end of the week, I'd started like this public art campaign, a billboard campaign around anti-violence in the neighborhood. Things like a man doesn't become a man by killing another man and that kind of thing. Billboards going up all over the place, lawn signs, buttons, just a whole variety of things. But one of the wonderful things that happened as I made these signs, got all this stuff together, was that people would come out of their houses when they saw me putting up the signs to ask if they could help me. And in various parts of the neighborhood, the signs are still up in store windows and in bar windows and bodegas and so forth, 3 years after the fact. And so this has been really very, very important work for me to be involved in and engaged in, thinking about these sort of questions of responsibility, of social responsibility. How do we protect our community? How do we protect our kids? What language do we use to have a conversation with the community and with young people in the community who are primarily not only the victims of crimes, but also the perpetrators of crimes? And so all of this stuff is going on in my head, and yet, these questions about responsibility are absolutely key. They're absolutely key. So, that we are responsible for what goes on in our community. As militants, we were feared, but as thugs, we are only despised. Like thinking about this sort of range of conversation that I might have, and then developing matchbooks and putting matchbooks all over the city in bodegas and bars, so that you walked into a bar, right, you would get this matchbook, and then that became then the message. And something really wonderful happened. So you make all this stuff and making thousands of things and trying to figure out like a whole series of strategies for allowing this work out into the public, using newspaper inserts and billboards and then electronic billboards. And various people in various communities are trying to figure out, or rather in industries are trying to figure out how to help me keep my signs up longer, or the woman at the newspaper is telling me that it's cheaper to use the advertising circular as opposed to the Sunday newspaper because it goes to thousands of households. And not only that, I could sort of, define it by zip code, how to just sort of move it into the house, how to use the church in order to do the same thing. And then I ship matchbook covers around to various people, institutions, museums. I talk about perpetual whiteness. That's a problem as well. And then I make this one matchbook that says, contrary to popular belief, your life does matter. And I sent a box, 2, 3, to a friend of mine who works with young people. I sent this box to him maybe a year or so ago, year and a half ago. Recently I saw him, and he had a round table with a group of young men that he'd been working with. And he said to the young men, he said, listen, I want you to bring something to our next meeting. I don't care what it is, but I want you to bring something to that next meeting that really matters to you. Something that really matters to you. And a year and a half later, this young boy walks in, and he pulls out this matchbook that he had been given a year and a half before that said, contrary to popular belief, your life does matter. It's really a wonderful, wonderful story. And so you start doing these kinds of projects, and you have no sense, really, of where it's going to really go and whose life it's really going to touch. All I knew was at that moment it was very important for me to be involved and for me to think of strategically about ways of involving and protecting and being engaged with my community. And then finally, as a part of that, I produced a piece called A Safe Zone. This is actually in black and white, but the piece is actually in color. It's yellow, sort of like cautionary yellow and black. And these went out, thousands of them went out through newspapers, Sunday's newspapers, circulars, just thousands of them, to create a safe zone in the neighborhood, asking that you post, that the person receiving it would post it in a window, in the front window or in the front door of a business or a home, creating a safe zone throughout a neighborhood. So this has been like a very important project, and out of this project has come yet another project, which is called the Institute of Sound and Style. So that on the one hand, I understood very well that I needed to respond to immediately to the question of violence, but I also knew that a lot of what's happening with young people is that they have lost hope, that they have no skill, that they have no training. So I thought, okay, well, all right, so I have like a kind of certain set of skill and a certain ability even to teach. Daryl, again, sitting in the audience, was one of my teachers who taught me a great deal about teaching early on in my life. And so I came up with this idea that since kids are primarily interested in fashion and music, pop culture, and sex, that I could do a project that would be primarily based, at least on the first two. So that institute has been going for the last couple of years. It's called the Institute of Sound and Style. It's a summer program, and it introduces kids to video, to photography, to recording technologies, that you don't have to just be the rapper, right? You don't have to just be the rapper. You can be like the sound engineer. You can be the producer. You can be the graphic artist. You can be, so it's kind of wonderful. So, so I came up with this idea, and I thought, okay, now if you don't buy those Jimmy Choos, you don't buy those Jimmy Choos, maybe you can buy a couple of cameras for some kids, right? I mean, so I kind of measure everything like that. It's like, okay, if I don't buy those shoes and I don't buy that dress, then I'm cool, right? I can take care of a few things. And it's been sort of amazing. It's actually been kind of wonderful. I thought that for the most part that I was giving to my children, but in the end, they're giving sort of an amazing amount to me, that my life is so much more fulfilled because of these knuckleheads, you know? And I was telling somebody yesterday, there was this one little girl who, these are all teenagers. We managed to pay them all, which was very important, because they're poor kids, and poor kids need money, or they get in trouble. It's a summer program. So it was very important for us to pay them and for us to be very deeply involved with them, and that's what we did. But there was this one little girl who was just who was just driving me crazy. I thought, but you're gonna have to get out of here. You're gonna have to go. And but she turned out really to be my A student, right? The #1 student, and I adore her. And she was my great lesson, that she taught me in a very, very real way that you just never give up on a child, that you just never give up on a child, and that half the time they're trying to figure out, how quickly you are going to give up on them, because for the most part, that's their relationship with the adults and the teachers that are around them. They don't have the privilege of an institution such as Stanford behind them. So that's the work that I've been doing with my kiddies, and because I won the MacArthur this year, I can actually take care of most of this program next year myself, but I still do take donations because I would like to have a pair of Jimmy's shoes. Looking into the mirror, the black woman asks, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" In the mirror says, "Snow White, you black bitch, and don't you forget it." What are the 3 things you can't give a black person? A black eye, a fat lip, or a job. My relationship to humor, using humor was a very important part of the work. And through Ain't Joking, I did a whole series, and some of those things are on display here. There are a number of things that we can talk about around humor. Jewish humor, black humor have always interested me. They're very, very similar in a lot of ways. These sort of 2 groups that have had a Holocaust imposed upon them in very different ways, but real ways. And so the humor is very much the same, and always deeply self-reflective. It's very interesting, And, like I noticed early on that in sort of the culture, blacks tell a lot of jokes about black people, and Jews tell a lot of jokes about Jewish people, and white people tell jokes about everybody else. Then there's, there came this sort of period of time when I was living in New England and teaching, working with lots of young people, young women. I don't know really what young women are really thinking about right now. I haven't taught in the last couple of years. I'm sort of anxious in some ways, not so much to teach, but to be around young people so that I understand where they are right now. But it was a very sort of tumultuous period in my own life. I was working, I was teaching, making photography, making photographs, trying to understand really my place and my voice on the continuum. Where did I fit in, really? I'd already started making Ain't Joking. I'd done that kind of work. I'd made family pictures and stories already. I was already starting to use words and text and voice in a very particular kind of way, but I wasn't quite yet what I wanted to be in terms of the making of a certain kind of image. And then one day I started making these photographs of a person sitting at a kitchen table. It started actually with a man. The image is called, or the text is, "Jim, if you choose to accept, the mission is to land on your own 2 feet." Beautiful man, beautiful moment. And it's what I tell students all the time, that how important it is to maintain and to hold on to your archive, to hold on to the images that you make, the things that you write, you know, because they will come back to you. If they are true and they're real and there's something deep in them, that they will come back to you and they will assist you in making the work that you need to make. And so I made this piece with my friend who lived in my neighborhood. I always work with people often that I know, and started this piece of the Kitchen Table series. Of course, it's an image and text piece. There are singles and diptychs and triptychs, a story about a man and a woman, and really a woman's search for herself. And one of the important things that happened in the making of this, you know, I was at this moment in my life where I was crying an awful lot. You know, that I was really just struggling to get to a place in my life and in my heart and in my work and in my mind. And you know, but I worked very, very hard. And every morning I would get up and I would wake up and I would cry, and then I would stumble to my desk and I would work. And then I would get in my car and I would drive towards school and I would cry. And I would get to school and I would work with my wonderful kids, and I would give it a full day, you know, and into an evening. And then I would get back into my car and I would drive home and I would cry. And then I would work some more, and then I would cry myself to sleep. And this went on for months. It was exhausting and very, very, very painful. And then one morning I woke up. A girlfriend of mine called me, who just called me just a few minutes ago, because today is her birthday. And I answered the phone in a voice that was so much like my mother's. I put the phone down and I walked around the room for 5 minutes trying to figure out where she could possibly be. And then I realized, of course, that that voice was coming through me, and that something transformative was actually happening in me, and that the thing that I had been searching for, that voice, had finally kind of arrived. And it was very, very, very deep. And I was making these photographs, and I'm thinking about women, I'm thinking about the role of women, I'm thinking about the relationship of women to their children, I'm thinking about how to examine that by using this very simple economy of means, this beautiful, simple light of illumination onto things, and trying to figure out notions of voice and how to present this body, standing in, Carrie standing in for women generally, how to present this body towards the world. And it was really kind of an amazing moment. I've learned a great deal from working on this project. The text I wrote actually in a day. You know, I just, you know, with the tape recorder, I made it. And then I went home and I sat down and I transcribed it, basically. Very, very interesting. But that sort of discovery of self, through going back to something that was as simple as the sound of my beginning, the sound of my mother, as it were, was absolutely crucial and critical to getting this work made, getting me made, ultimately, as an artist. So that work, too, is on view. I hope that some of you have a chance to look at it. And it's also published in this really beautiful book that Yale has done for this exhibition. Working with other artists has been and continues to be important to me. And Robert Colescott, when he represented the United States for the Venice Biennale, sometime I think in the early 80s, I'm not sure exactly what year it was, asked me to do his official portrait, but I had a sense that he wasn't really looking for a headshot. So I made this piece, seduced by one another, yet bound by certain social conventions. You framed me and I framed you, but we were both framed by modernism. And even though we knew better, we continued that time-honored tradition of the artist and his model. I'm always sort of interested in the way in which people, women, are accomplices in their own victimization. And so I explore that a lot, that tension a lot in the work. But working with Colescott was important because it helped me think about my relationship to painting and to painters and the history of painting as well as with these pieces that followed immediately after working with Colescott. Standing on shaky ground, I posed myself for critical study, but was no longer certain of the questions to be asked. It was clear I was not Manet's type, and Picasso, who had a way with women, only used me, and Duchamp, who I adore, never even considered me. But it could have been worse. Imagine my fate had de Kooning got hold of me. From the Africa series, this long fascination. I didn't know how much I loved architecture. I didn't really know how much I loved architecture for really a long time. And so I was in Africa. I was in West Africa, primarily between Ghana and Senegal. And, Senegal just blows my mind. Really a great, great place. And and then in Mali, in the northern section of the country, really beautiful. And I started paying attention to architecture for a while. I didn't quite know exactly what I was seeing, but I knew that I was seeing something that was quite profound in terms of the way in which the body was inscribed on the architecture, and that the architecture let you know exactly who belonged in that space, right? Is this female space? Is this male space, right? Pretty clear. It's pretty clear. So, those ideas are very important to me. But of course, in certain places, like in Mali, it's very clear about the way in which architecture inscribes and the way in which it allows you to know, the power of architecture, who belongs where. In the West, of course, it's a little bit more difficult to fathom. But we also know it and we sense it. We sense male space. There are all these sort of invisible boundaries that are sort of set up around architecture to impose or to articulate, actually, who belongs in that space. So not only, though, was I dealing with these sort of questions of, of architecture in terms of its sexuality, but also architecture in terms of its power. So looking at the slave coast was very important, and I did a lot of work around this area, primarily, again, in Senegal and in Ghana, looking at the architecture of slavery. And then I go back to that again later when I look at the architecture in Rome. At a certain point, Getty asked me to do a project, commissioned me to do a project in response to another set of daguerreotypes that they were very, very interested in. And so Weston Neff came to me, who was the curator at that time of photography, to ask me to think about this piece. And the thing that I love about commissions is that they are commissions. And it's really helpful. And that I actually get a chance to work on the things that I really love, and somebody is paying for it. It's like, how bad can that be? So, but it sort of offers me an incredible amount of freedom to sort of do what I do. And so I made this piece. It's called From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried. And I was very interested in using a lot of different kinds of daguerreotypes and appropriated images and then manipulating them, coloring them, using text. Again, I use text a lot, text or voice, for much of the work that I've been doing around this time. This, again, is From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried. You became a scientific profile, a Negroid type, an anthropological debate, and a photographic subject. You became mammy, mama, mother, and then, yes, confidant, ha. Descending the throne, you became foot soldier and cook. You became house, yard, field, and kitchen. You became Uncle Tom, John, and Clemens, Jim. Drivers, writers, and men of letters. For your names, you took hope and humble. Black and tan, your whipped wind of change howled low, blowing itself smack in the middle of Ellington's orchestra. Billy heard it too and cried strange fruit tears. But your resistance was found in the food you placed on the master's table. Ha! Born with a veil, you became root worker, juju mama, voodoo queen, voodoo doctor. Some said you were the spinning image of evil. You became playmate to the patriarch and its daughter. You became an accomplice and the score for God Bless the Child Who Has His Own. Out of deep rivers, mixed-matched mulattas, mind you, a variety of types sprung up everywhere. You became the Joker's joke and anything but what you were. Ha. Some laughed long and hard and loud. And others said, well, the only thing a nigger can do for me is to shine my shoes. You became boots, spades, and coons. And restless after the longest winter, you marched and marched and marched. And in your sing-song prayer, you asked, well, did my Lord deliver Daniel? And so making this piece was sort of amazing. You know, I had really sort of extraordinary conversations with people, from Robert Frank, one of the great photographers of all time. Robert Frank and I screamed at each other for hours. It was fantastic. It's really wonderful fight to have with him about the use of his image in this work. Gary Winogrand's wife was an interesting conversation. Robert Mapplethorpe's estate was interesting. Harvard was going to sue me. I mean, it was just like a battle to make this work. And so it was, you know, all kinds of complicated issues around copyright and notions of appropriation, what was appropriate or not in appropriation. All of those questions came up. And so it was a really great case. And I understand actually that a young law student has actually just published a piece about it, that maybe it's in the Harvard Law Review or something like that. Anyway, it was a very interesting story around the making of the piece. And then Harvard decided not to sue me, and then they bought the piece. And so I didn't know, I just didn't know what to do at that point. So it's been an interesting thing. I've had variant, you know, I don't think of myself as, you know, I have a lot of fights. I guess that's all I can say. I do. You know, I have this idea about having a right to do something and to look at something and to look at things critically. And sometimes it just doesn't sit very well with other people. But I've also made like other kinds of pieces too. So on the one hand, a piece like, like From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried is interesting because it sort of works on so many different levels. I mean, on the one hand, it's about American history, and it's about photography. It's about the history of photography, but it's also about the history of African Americans represented in photography. And so it's sort of moving across a number of platforms that are very, very interesting, so that you can engage the work, I think, in a number of different ways. I think often it's sort of, relegated to sort of the question of race, but it's really much deeper and much more engaging than that. I think the quick ways to think about it is dealing with, simply around the question of race. But it really becomes like a wonderful tool of really looking at the history of photography itself. So it kind of works in lots of ways that I very much am interested in and have been useful for me to think about. Then I make, these pieces that I thought for a period of time that I didn't really like moving like laterally, like around the room, that another kind of physicality might be necessary. And so I started making things on cloth. And these are very large pieces that hang. Unfortunately, we didn't have like enough space here, so they were edited out of this, this exhibition. But there are 3 different pieces. One is called Ritual and Revolution. The next one is the Jefferson Suite, which looks at the role of studying the human genome, what the human genome was, and unpacking the human genome, what it would tell us about ourselves. This has been fascinating. It's been fascinating. I think that, we only have like, a few chromosomes that are different than rats, and it's kind of amazing, right? So I still don't know what we know about ourselves as a result of mapping the human genome, but I suppose that there are probably brilliant scientists that are doing amazing things that I'm just too slow to pick up on. And then I also did, like a very important project, again with these sort of banners, these hanging pieces for Williams College, who commissioned me to do a piece on Hampton College. Hampton was the first African American and Native American university or college in the country, really, started by William Armstrong, and important early artists like Francis Benjamin Johnson worked there as well. This gives you a sense of audience and relationship to the banner, so you kind of see how they work. This was another one of those sort of highly contested pieces because there are a number of Native Americans that are still interned and buried at Hampton, which was a problem. And so Hampton decided, unfortunately, that they would not show the work. That posed a number of other complicated issues for them as well. Looking at some of the first Native Americans really to arrive at Hampton, and then of course what happens to them as the process of acculturation takes place. And there's been some amazing studies that were done around this. Thomas Jefferson, of course, did amazing studies and thinking about the relationship of Native Americans to their land and what it would mean really for Native Americans to be here, to still be here as a conquered people, as opposed to what it would mean to bring black people here as a conquered people, but disassociated from their land. So Jefferson had already done some very, very deep thinking around the Native American presence in the United States and knew that education, this conforming to a Western idea would be absolutely essential to Native Americans staying here. And when, of course, that didn't work, then other things began to happen that we, of course, all know about. So I think probably in sort of relationship to that then, these ideas that I have about opposition, where is the opposition, where are the oppositional forces in our contemporary society, speaking back into power becomes really important. Where is the opposition? I made a piece saying that I remember long nights and endless discussion with you when we were not afraid to speak our minds, but now I only hear the hush, hush, hush of our mutual silence. Where is the opposition? And so these ideas about change, social change, was a part of this piece. Who, what, when, where? where is it possible for resistance, for revolt, for revolution to actually take place in the country. And thinking that through ideas about constructivism, that sort of great period in Russian art that fostered in so much of what I think we still pull on as contemporary artists. So these are pieces that I made for that exhibition that was at the Whitney for a period of time. It was very interesting because the comment books are very fascinating. And I did this work, Where is the Opposition? And the comments were things like, I think you need to go back to doing that race stuff that you've been working on. Very interesting. Things from the Beacon Project. I started using this figure a while ago. This woman a while ago sort of appeared to me. And again, I realized as I went through even this exhibition that the first photographs that I made of this woman with her back towards the camera 35, 40 years ago became an emblem for me in a new body of work that I would go on to make. Again, the necessity and the importance of holding on, students, to your archive, developing your archive and using it, pulling from it, borrowing, going back to it again and again and again for those kernels of imagination that are springing forth. So I was invited to Rome. I've been wanting to go to Rome for, since I saw Gidget goes to Rome as a kid. And, I'm really glad that I didn't go when I was 16 because I think that I probably would have had sex the whole time and I wouldn't have done anything really progressive with my time. So I'm glad that I went actually when I was a bit older and I knew a bit more about what I was about as a woman as opposed to a young girl just running around and getting laid. Looking again, these ideas about architecture, the power of that place, and thinking about Rome as, the place that, money comes out of, and empire comes out of. All of these ideas come out of this sort of great, place and country. And so it was very important for me to go look at that. And so I made this series of work. It's called Roaming, and I just roamed all over Rome and other places, north and south, trying to understand something about the architecture, like places like Matera, just an amazing, amazing, amazing city, as well as, Mussolini's Rome, fascist Rome, ancient Rome. Looking at those structures and putting myself in those environments to imagine them, to understand something of the relationship, the human to this incredible scale of architecture as it exists there. I spent time going to every single gate and photographing myself at every single gate, the 13 gates that surround the city. Of course, spending time at the great churches and the simple churches and the magnificent churches of that place. San Lorenzo, the only section of Rome that was bombed during the war. Piazza di Popolo. Mussolini's Rome, fascist Rome. A Jewish quarter. And just as I was finishing up, I started thinking about museums and the role and the power and the structure of museums, and thought that I should go stand in front of them too. Who is in and who is outside of these primary institutions that have molded what we understand to be important about the arts? You know, their structure, they're beautiful, they're wonderful to look at. And these are all primarily made by myself. Usually I'm just alone with an old raggedy camera and a tripod and a black dress running around. I get a lot of exercise. But they've been important for me to make, to be at these institutions, to think about these institutions and the role of museums. And of course, there's a changing role of museums. Museums are starting to think a little bit more about actually the changing demographics of the country, and therefore what has to be reflected inside of them in order to bring in a whole new group of people. What is the relationship of what is on the wall to those who are looking? What does it have to say about our culture when consistently women and minorities are really not included in some of the most important collections in the world? Or they have been distanced really from modernism, and so they are functioning primarily as outliers, and the only extent to which you regard the work is to the extent that you think that it might be important in terms of race, but not necessarily in terms of cultural production. And I think that this is a huge problem to the extent that you think of African American or women or brown people as being outliers and away from the modernist discourse is to the extent that you really undervalue their own cultural production. And that has to change. So I've been doing this work, and I'll continue doing this work. And every time, you know, I didn't bring my camera or my dress to Stanford, so we'll have to do the Cantor next time. So, okay. And we will finish up here in just a few moments. These are, you know, some pieces that you'll see here in the show. You know, these little colored people. I've been working with these kids and these tones, tonalities, you know, African jewels and gems. They're like little morsels of like sweets that I want to eat half the time. I mean, you know, they're absolutely exquisite, beautiful, beautiful little renderings of people. And then, you know, at a certain point, you know, I realized that there was something about voicing and something about these sort of great, great singers that I was starting to miss, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. I didn't hear them anymore. I didn't hear them on the radio. I didn't hear them playing any place unless I was actually playing them in my home. And so I started thinking about this project that I made called Slow Fade to Black. This idea of thinking about these women like Eartha Kitt, Billie Holiday, Abby Lincoln, Mahalia Jackson, Coco Taylor, Dorothy Dandridge, Josephine Baker, Lena Horne, Catherine Dunham, Marian Anderson, Dinah Washington, Nina Simone, Betty Carter. And I think about them and I miss them. I miss the sound of them in my life. I miss the sound of them generally in the larger culture. So I think about them, and I thought that it might be very important to make a work that really spoke to a slow fade to black. Mae Lum is here. Mae was very important to me. I started doing a piece called Constructing History. I realized at a certain moment that I was in bed. And I was thinking about a project that I wanted to work on, and I wanted to make everything kind of from scratch, and I was interested in the texture of how things looked, how, like all the material needed to be revealed somehow. And I called Mae. We had met in Cappadocia, Turkey, and she came to work with me to imagine the scenario of what we might look at in this culture. And I thought how extraordinary it was that, for the most part, who we are now, how we came to be as we are, really came about because of a great many assassinations that really took place in the country. In that, had it not been for those extraordinary assassinations that took place throughout the 60s, that maybe we would have a very different relationship with one another now. And so that these incredible men, for the most part, gave their extraordinary lives so that we might be able to widen the path for one another. And being able to engage students in that process and to think about that and to ask them to understand something about that moment, that time, those people, who was there and what time it happened, and who did what to who, might be important. And so these photographs from constructing history, things that are made for Malcolm, Medgar, Martin, for the Kennedys in the first blow, for Robert Kennedy, who knew, of course, that he was going to be next, who understood that perhaps, who called Hoover and said, "Did you kill my brother?" He knew. Pretty powerful. The Kent State students. So really, just trying to, and there are a number of pieces that go into this one. Maybe there are 20 pieces, 15 pieces, I'm not really sure. But just trying to mark out that territory, was very important. And then most recently, I was asked to do this project for W.E.B. Du Bois. And I thought, well, what would be a really wonderful way of thinking about Du Bois? And it was spring. And I've been thinking about memorial contemplative spaces. So I thought that perhaps a really lovely contemplative space would be wonderful for Du Bois. But then I thought, well, how would thousands of people participate in notions of hope? And so my assistant and I started calling around, and we decided that we were going to have a peony name for Du Bois. And it's called the W.E.B. Du Bois Peony. Its common name is the Hope Peony, and it is available for sale from this great place that I've been working with. It's a new variety of peony, and I've been working with this great guy from Hollingworth Farms, who's the distributor, and I just found out that sales have been so tremendous that they don't have any more flowers to send out this year, any more roots to send out this year. But it became this fabulous way for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to be involved in Du Bois and to allow hope to spring in your own garden. So I've been working with Walter Hood, a landscape architect who is not here today, but who teaches at UC Berkeley, who's designed this really beautiful contemplative space for the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where the exhibition has just opened. And so I'm hoping that, at some point that maybe some of you might decide to look up Hollingsworth Farms and let hope spring eternal in your own garden. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I think that, we're going to take a few questions.
Just a couple of questions, but please come to the aisles so that you can state your question.
Or they can be remarks as well.
We just have time for one or two, so.
Or we could concentrate on drinking. My favorite thing to do lately. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Text is an important part of your pieces, of many of your pieces. I was wondering how you came about to realize that.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
I'm wondering how you came to realize that you needed to include text with your images.
Oh, you know, very, very early on. I mean, you know, I can remember having this fight with one of my early professors, and I said to him, a photograph is worth 1,000 words, and he said, that's absolutely true, but which 1,000 are you speaking of? And somehow though I was very angry at him at that moment, it at a certain point made a certain kind of sense because I wanted to experience, I wanted to have another experience not only with the photographs, I wanted to have an experience with language in conjunction with photographs. And so I started it very early, like in the early 80s, 1980, 82 or so.
And how you come about choosing the type for that you use? It seems that you use a lot of sans serif, but not exclusively.
I know, it's true.
How is there a rationale?
I spend a lot I love fonts. I love fonts and text, and so I really spend a lot of time considering like what works and what is readable, you know, and you know, and a lot of it depends on, you know, how much text there is, because certain texts, certain fonts allow you to read it, you know, that it's very physical and it's physically demanding. Reading is physically demanding, and so I make a lot of assumptions about what is. You know, the demand when I'm selecting the typeface.
You don't have a favorite font?
You know, if I'm writing like letters, I use like Baskerville. And then, you know, for a while, you know, my husband and I, we were both like obsessed with Trajan. We use that a lot. And then, you know, sometimes I use Futura. But right now I have a thing for Impact.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk. I am very curious about the figure with the back turned. Yesterday and today again, you mentioned that the turning away from the camera was something that allowed you to open up questions away from race. And the reason I ask about that specifically is that as an art historian of sugar plantations, there was kind of a great expectation that a lot of my work would be about race. And one of the first times that I was able to sort of move away or include it in a larger vector was through an artist in the early 1800s who ended up stuck in Jamaica for 10 years. He was from England, and many of his slave portraits are with the back turned. And so I suppose it's very concerning for me that your back has to be turned to the camera in order for questions of race to fade away and for the public to conceive of the work as being about more than race. And I just wonder, in what kind of situation, how and when do you see the possibility that young artists of color and even, you know, in a larger framework aside from the art world can turn to face the camera and it no longer be about race? And in addition, how do you see the responsibility, whether you see it existing or not, of the artist of color to deal with race in their work?
Well, there's, you know, thank you for the question. It's a loaded one. I mean, I think that in a lot of ways it's almost unavoidable. It's unavoidable because of the context, the way in which we exist and our position in the country. It's almost impossible not to. but that's sort of, you know, in some ways, that's sort of like the most obvious thing, right, to really deal with. I think that really this looking at race actually has less to do with really the question of race and much more with the question of complex humanity. And that is, I think, the charge that we actually have. And it is both a delight and a burden. And I think that it's okay. You know, I mean, I think that, you know, it's like, in some ways, you simply have to celebrate it, even as you struggle to change it. Right? And so that, you know, my sense of the work is really trying to deal with the most multiplicity of the vastness of the human project. And all too often it gets sort of slapped down into race, because again, that becomes the easiest way of dealing with and negotiating the work. I often tell people that the work is much more about notions of unrequited love.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming back to the Bay Area. And the question I have has to do with the Bay Area and your life here. How did living here when you did, first in 1970 or thereabouts, I think, and in particular with the labor movement, shape much of what you've done?
Everything. Everything. You know, I worked with, you know, there are people here in this audience that I work very, very closely with, politically and culturally. So it had profound impact on everything that I do. It is the underpinning, in a way, of much of the work and the ideas that really rest behind the work. You know, I was in this, you know, very important small Marxist organization for a very long time, and that's what we thought about. That's what we did every day for a very long period of time. So that my cultural formation in the Bay Area is very much part of my identity, and I suppose that's one of the reasons that I said that I grew up here. I became a woman here. I became sort of conscious of the world in a very profound way here. Yes?
I was wondering if you can comment on storytelling and how much in your family life growing up, how much it influenced you and how it affected you growing up and becoming an adult in your visual sense and how you saw the world.
You know, it's interesting. I don't really, I don't really see myself really as a storyteller. I mean, of course, my father was a really wonderful storyteller, and that had great influence on me. But I don't really see myself in that way. You know, I write, and I make up all kinds of fictions. But I'm not necessarily a storyteller. I just use text with my work. And that's very, very different, I think. But I think a lot of people have called me a storyteller, and I'm not quite sure why. But I think that I'm not quite sure why. But I'm really not a storyteller. And, but I'm deeply interested in fiction. And I'm very interested in language and playing with language in relationship to images. But I'm sure that my father has had a great deal to do with my interest in speaking. So I think we'll take like one more question, and then we're gonna go party. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, what would you say to a young female photographer who...
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.